Hello students, here we are. As you know by now that we have the decision has been made that we will not come back to live classes before the end of the year. I'm really sad about that, but we're going to try to do the best we can, okay? So we are continuing to learn about the digestive tract, and at the end of this lecture I'll give you a couple of hints on ideas for your model. Remember, you're going to make a human body model for our end of the year project. So last week we learned all about like the tongue and the saliva and the sense of taste and the sense of smell and how that all works. Well, today we're going to look at the digestive system, how we go about swallowing, chewing and swallowing and eating and digesting our food. Okay, so it's going to start up here. We know it starts in the mouth with the teeth and the tongue and the saliva, right? Now we're going to look after we've chewed our food, we're going to swallow it. The fancy word for swallowing is deglutition or deglutition. And then the chewed up food is now called a bolus. That sounds kind of gross, but that's the name of it, the bolus. And it enters into the pharynx. So I like this picture over here because it shows us the pharynx. So the pharynx is the part, it's kind of shared between the respiratory system, breathing, and the digestive system, eating. It's a shared area right there. And then things split up. So the air will go this way through the larynx, which is your voice box, down your trachea to your lungs, but your food will go this way, behind there, into the esophagus, which goes down to the stomach. It's very important that our food not go down this one, right? Because that's called choking, and we don't want that to happen. We're going to see a video in just a minute that shows you how our body is so beautifully designed and so brilliantly coordinated that it will keep us from choking. It does fail now and then, right? But it will keep us from that. So we're going to watch this little video about swallowing.
Swallowing, or deglutition, is the process by which food passes from the mouth to the stomach. This movement is controlled by the nervous system and involves both voluntary and involuntary muscle contractions. Before food is swallowed, it is mechanically broken down in the mouth by chewing or mastication. The salivary glands secrete the enzymes lingual lipase and salivary amylase. Salivary amylase begins the chemical breakdown of starch, carbohydrates, in the mouth. The water content of saliva helps bind particles together to form a bolus that can be swallowed. Swallowing occurs in 3 stages. The first is a voluntary phase called the buccal or oral transit phase. Here the tongue moves upwards and backwards against the hard and soft palates to push the bolus into the oropharynx. Next is the pharyngeal stage, in which involuntary movements push the bolus through the pharynx and into the esophagus. Movement of the bolus stimulates receptors in the oropharynx, which send impulses to the deglutition center in the medulla oblongata and the lower pons of the brainstem. The brain signals the soft palate and uvula to close off the nasopharynx, and the epiglottis to seal off the larynx. This prevents the bolus from entering the respiratory tract. The upper esophageal sphincter relaxes to allow the bolus to move into the esophagus and contracts to reduce backflow into the pharynx. In the final esophageal stage, the bolus is pushed onward by peristalsis, a progression of involuntary wave-like contractions of the circular and longitudinal smooth muscles of the esophagus. As the bolus approaches the end of the esophagus, the lower esophageal sphincter relaxes and the bolus moves into the stomach.
Okay, so that might have had a little more information than you really needed, but it was really good, and I really enjoyed that that animation where it showed how that flap closed over the trachea to keep us from choking, right? So that's called the epiglottis. So I just thought the video quality was really great. Okay, so now we've swallowed. It's in the esophagus, right? And so it's a long, flat tube, so it stays flat behind our windpipe, behind our trachea, and that is because we want the trachea needs to stay open for breathing, because we're breathing all the time, okay? But we're only swallowing when we're eating, right? So it stays kind of flat until we put some food into it, and then it allows the food to go in, and smooth muscle tissue starts to push it down. All right, so that process is called peristalsis. Peristalsis is that muscle movement that's going to keep pushing the food down the esophagus. Even if you were standing on your head, the food would still go into your stomach, okay? So it's not, I mean, gravity certainly helps, but it's not absolutely necessary. For instance, when we have astronauts up in space, they don't have gravity, right? They can swallow just fine. And it has to do with the peristalsis, the smooth muscle action in your esophagus. There's also that peristalsis and smooth muscle action in the rest of our digestive tract, in our stomach, in our intestine, that kind of thing, and we'll get to it. It's a strong muscular contraction. This shows it here. So on the right, you will see, here's our bolus, and it's moving down the esophagus. And that's each little muscle's contracting as it's pushing all the way down. All right, so over here you can see pushing it at the top and then pushing it at the top like that, okay? So it goes over and over to keep it going down. All right. Peristalsis, yes. So then it gets to our stomach. All right, the stomach is this stomach-shaped organ right here. It's interesting when you go, like I've dissected many different kinds of animals, you know, from sharks to rats to, you know, little pigs, and it's pretty amazing that the stomachs all look exactly like that. They just look like a stomach, yeah. So it's in the middle of your belly. It's made up of actually quite a lot of smooth muscle. We're going to see a picture kind of showing the different layers of smooth muscle that are in there, because it has really strong contractions to it. It stretches out to accommodate more food. You know this after Thanksgiving meal, right? When you've eaten so much, you're like, oh, I think I'm going to burst, because your stomach gets nice and big. It is designed to store the food, okay? So it'll hold on to the food until the intestines are ready for it, okay? But while it's in there, the digestion will begin by breaking it down some more. So we've already started the digestion in our mouth with chewing, with saliva, and now it's going to be in the stomach. The stomach's going to beat it up a little bit, move it around, and the stomach has a very strong acid in it. Okay, the acid is called hydrochloric acid, and it's very, very strong. In fact, if you were to take some of that hydrochloric acid out of your stomach and then put it onto your skin, it would burn it, okay, because it's that acidic. I'm going to surprise you here. You might be surprised by this, that you already know that this is acidic, and that's because if you've ever, and I'm guessing you have, if you've ever vomited, yuck, nobody likes to do that, right? But you know how it hurts, right? That's because that food in there includes a lot of that acid, and as it comes back up through your esophagus to come out of your body, it burns just a little bit. Okay, it's got the food mixed with it and everything. I will say that vomiting is a necessary part of living. It's part of a way of our body to get rid of something we want out of our body. It's a strong muscular contraction. If you've ever had that happen, you know that you really can't stop it, right? It's almost impossible there to stop it. So it is important, but nobody likes it, right? And then yet that acid in there is very uncomfortable. Let's watch a little video about what happens to that food when it enters the stomach.
What exactly happens in our stomachs when we eat? Even before we have taken the first bite of a meal, the brain sends impulses to the stomach. These impulses start the production of secretions in the stomach, and the upper part of the stomach, which acts as a reservoir, expands. The food passes into the stomach through the cardia at the stomach entrance. This is a muscle that acts like a valve, closing the top of the stomach. The top part of the stomach, the fundus, is where food and the air that we swallow with every bite is collected. This is where the stomach volume starts to adapt. The fundus is an extremely adaptable structure. The more food goes into the stomach, the more it actively expands. In the middle part of the stomach, called the body, gastric juice is produced and mixed with the mass of chewed food. The main component of gastric juice is gastric acid. This eliminates bacteria in the food and also helps to prepare the food for the following stages of digestion. The muscular contractions of the stomach wall churn the food mass and mix it with gastric juice. 3 contractions per minute move the food mass back and forth. After a certain time, the contents of the stomach are adequately broken down and mixed, and are passed in small quantities into the intestine via the pylorus. As the stomach empties, it gradually returns to its previous size.
Okay, kind of gross. You hear all that noise in the background? You know, it's kind of that sound like when your stomach is grumbling, right? So, and there's those what we call stomach noises. They can be kind of scary. But you notice like when you're hungry, the problem is your stomach kind of gets really small, right? It's doesn't have much in it, and your body's like, well, I could use some more food in here, and it'll start to move around and make those noises. Because at the top here, there's always a little room up here in the fundus area for gases, right? So gases are collecting. The gases come from various locations. Sometimes the food we eat is produce gases like beans and some of our cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower and things like that. But also while we're talking and eating at the same time and this kind of thing, chewing gum, it will cause us to take air into our stomach, so the air gets in there. So as the stomach starts to get bigger when you're eating, and it needs to make a little more room, we'll let those gases out right up through here, and that's called a burp. All right, so it goes back up through there, and it comes through your larynx and makes that funny noise. And usually we say "excuse me" right after that happens. Okay, so here is the stomach, and I'm going to bring this picture in bigger in just a moment. To talk about some of these what are called tunics. But notice the sphincters. This is called a sphincter, okay? It's known as the cardiac sphincter. Cardiac is heart. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but that word refers to the heart. This sphincter is in the chest area, similar to where the heart is in our chest. So that's why it's called cardiac, because it's near the heart. And then it's got a tight closure on it right there, okay? That's what keeps this acid in the stomach from going back up into the esophagus. We want to stop that from happening. And then we have the pyloric sphincter down here at the bottom of the stomach. This area of the stomach is called the pylorus. And that's, of course, going to be able to ration out the stomach contents into the small intestine right here, okay? So let's see. If this sphincter loosens up, sometimes it'll loosen up due to hormonal situations, age, this kind of thing. Some of the acid will actually come back up through here, right? So when that fails a little bit right there, it'll cause this to burn a little bit. It's called heartburn because that burning sensation is near where the heart is. Okay, but let's say the food is all in here. It's getting mixed around with that acid like we saw in the video right there. Remember it said it was squeezing it. Look at these muscles. These muscles are squeezing it and mixing it with the hydrochloric acid, and it turns the bolus into something called chyme. Here's the word down here, C-H-Y-M-E, chyme. So what are the functions of the stomach then? One of its functions is, of course, to secrete that acid. It's got a very low pH, a 1.5. That's a very strong acid. Okay, like I said, it could burn your skin. It's for storage. That's the second function right there. It's going to store the food. All right. It's not the vast majority of the digestion. It churns the bolus into chyme, and it adds a hormone called pepsin to it. Anytime you hear the word pep like that, like Pepsi or peppermint, it usually means having to do with digestion. And pepsin is going to help to digest the proteins that are in our food. There's weak peristalsis. So peristalsis is that muscle movement. And there's lots of muscle movement. When I say peristalsis, it means to be moving it downward through the whole system, right? Vomiting. Like I said earlier, vomiting is actually an important part in case we have something, in our body that we don't want in there, that will make us sick, something that makes us sick. All right. And some absorption of water takes place in the stomach, okay, but not absorption of nutrients, okay? That's a different part of our digestive system. I'm going to bring this stomach in a little closer here where we can see this. I just wanted you to notice all these different, so this muscle is going this way, so it's called longitudinal muscle layer. These are called tunics, by the way. Here's the body tunic, the longitudinal muscle layer tunic, the circular going around this way, and then our oblique kind of going at an angle right here. So we have all these different directions of muscular movement right there. Okay, so that muscular movement is churning the stomach. And then as it churns it, it will squeeze it out into the small intestine. All right, remember the pyloric sphincter is regulating that when it happens, that kind of thing. I just wanted you to see all that incredible musculature there. And then inside right here, remember that bag can stretch. When it's not very stretched out, it forms these kind of wrinkly parts on the inside, and those are called rugae. Now, you may have been wondering at this point, if it's so acidic in there, how is it not eating through the stomach itself? That's a good question. And the reason is that the cells in the rugae here, there's cells inside the stomach, it's called the mucosa in here, those cells are producing a lot of mucus. Okay, so the mucus is so strong that it's layering the entire stomach. If you saw the inside of a stomach, it would look really shiny. All right, because there's all this mucus on there. And that mucus actually protects the stomach interior from being affected by that acid. So a beautiful design right there, right? Now, sometimes that mucosa, that mucus will be not as produced as well. So some people who have taken medications, for instance, or people who have their digestive system is challenged in some way, they will stop producing so much of the mucus. And when that happens, the acid does burn the stomach. And that's called a stomach ulcer. You may have heard of that, a stomach ulcer, and it's very painful. And when that happens, a patient will end up with some medications that will help to hopefully rebuild that part of the stomach and make the stomach healthier to produce more of the mucus. Then the chyme, the chyme will move from the stomach into the small intestine. Now, it's called the small intestine, but it's actually about 21 feet long. Wow, huge, right? It's called small because the diameter of it is small, okay, compared to the large intestine. It's much longer than the large intestine, however. All right, so this is where the action takes place as far as absorbing the nutrients we get from our food. So the main job of the small intestine is to absorb that, okay? So it's designed for absorption. It's going to take in the stuff it wants, that our body needs, right? It definitely uses peristalsis to propel the food down through the system as it goes. The small intestine is nice and long, 21 feet long like that, so it has time as it moves through there to absorb everything we need from it. Now, in order to make that 21 feet even longer, the inner surface is actually covered with millions of little folds that will increase the surface area. I'll show that to you here. Oh, here's what it looks like in the body. It is broken down into three groups. Right out of the stomach, this part is called the duodenum or duodenum. That helps you spell it, right? And then it moves into the longest part of them here, which is called the jejunum. And then the very last part of it is called the ileum. Okay, and the ileum's going to hook up here to the large intestine right there. So that's the parts of it. But the interior of it, I want you to see. So see, it's got some waves here, to increase the surface area. And those waves look like this. And each one of those has another little extension like this called the villi. And the villi have microvilli on them. And that really increases the surface area to allow lots and lots of absorption. So right in here, what comes up in each one of these little villi, the villus right here, is a blood vessel. And the blood vessel, of course, gives nutrients to all those cells that need them. And the cells will absorb nutrients back into the blood. And there's also this thing right here called a lacteal. Yeah, the lymphatic vessel right here. This is what absorbs the fat that we eat in our diet. And it helps us with our immune system right there. Okay, the lacteal. Which brings us to a concept that I'm very happy has become more popular lately, and that's the idea of the gut microbiome. So as you know, I'm a microbiologist, and I've always told you that we give, bacteria a bad name sometimes, but the vast majority of bacteria is beneficial. It's good for us. If we didn't have it, we would be in trouble. So for instance, on our skin, we have a lot of bacteria naturally growing on our skin. If it were not there, then we would have an overgrowth of things like fungi and pathogenic bacteria. So it's important for our normal flora, our normal bacteria, to be there doing its job. And so we call that the gut microbiome. We tend to be afraid of bacteria, right? Oh, they cause disease. Well, they cause disease sometimes. Some of them, the pathogenic ones, are bad. Sometimes they'll be opportunistic. For instance, if I cut my skin, then some of the bacteria on my skin might get into my body, and that might cause a disease because it's in the place where it doesn't belong. Okay, but for the most part, the bacteria, God has designed us to have this bacteria, and we have a lot of bacteria in our gut. Okay, and we're going to see a little video right now to see why gut bacteria is so important to us. And I'm finally so delighted that the bacteria are getting their day, right? They're getting their day to see how important they are. So let's watch this little video right here.
Trillions of bacteria, viruses, and fungi live on or inside of us, and maintaining a good, balanced relationship with them is to our advantage. Together, they form the gut microbiome, a rich ecosystem that performs a variety of functions in our bodies. The bacteria in our guts can break down food the body can't digest, produce important nutrients, regulate the immune system, and protect against harmful germs. We don't yet have the blueprint for exactly which good bacteria a robust gut needs, but we do know that it's important for a healthy microbiome to have a variety of bacterial species. Many factors affect our microbiomes, including our environment, medications like antibiotics, and even whether we were delivered by C-section or not. Diet, too, is emerging as one of the leading influences on the health of our guts. And while we can't control all these factors, we can manipulate the balance of our microbes by paying attention to what we eat. Dietary fiber from foods like fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, and whole grains is the best fuel for gut bacteria. When bacteria digest fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids that nourish the gut barrier, improve immune function, and can help prevent inflammation, which reduces the risk of cancer. And the more fiber you ingest, the more fiber-digesting bacteria colonize your gut. In a recent study, scientists exchanged the regular high-fiber diets of a group of rural South Africans with the high-fat, meat-heavy diets of a group of African Americans. After just 2 weeks on the high-fat, low-fiber, Western-style diet, the rural African group showed increased inflammation of the colon as well as a decrease of butyrate. That's a short-chain fatty acid thought to lower risk of colon cancer. Meanwhile, the group that switched to a high-fiber, low-fat diet had the opposite result. So what goes wrong with our gut bacteria when we eat low-fiber processed foods? Lower fiber means less fuel for the gut bacteria, essentially starving them until they die off. This results in less diversity and hungry bacteria. In fact, some can even start to feed on the mucus lining. We also know that specific foods can affect gut bacteria. In one recent microbiome study, scientists found that fruits, vegetables, tea, coffee, red wine, and dark chocolate were correlated with increased bacterial diversity. These foods contain polyphenols, which are naturally occurring antioxidant compounds. On the other hand, foods high in dairy fat, like whole milk, and sugar-sweetened sodas were correlated with decreased diversity. How food is prepared also matters. Minimally processed, fresh foods generally have more fiber and provide better fuel. So lightly steamed, sautéed, or raw vegetables are typically more beneficial than fried dishes. There are also ways of preparing food that can actually introduce good bacteria, also known as probiotics, into your gut. Fermented foods are teeming with helpful probiotic bacteria like lactobacillus and bifidobacteria. Originally used as a way of preserving foods before the invention of refrigeration, fermentation remains a traditional practice all over the world. Foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, tempeh, and kombucha provide variety and vitality to our diets. Yogurt is another fermented food that can introduce helpful bacteria into our guts. That doesn't necessarily mean that all yogurt is good for us, though. Brands with too much sugar and not enough bacteria may not actually help. These are just general guidelines. More research is needed before we fully understand exactly how any of these foods interact with our microbiomes. We see positive correlations, but the insides of our guts are difficult places to make direct observations. For instance, we don't currently know whether these foods are directly responsible for the changes in diversity, or if something more complicated is happening. While we're only beginning to explore the vast wilderness inside our guts, we already have a glimpse of how crucial our microbiomes are for digestive health. The great news is we have the power to fire up the bacteria in our bellies. Fill up on fibers, fresh and fermented foods, and you can trust your gut to keep you going strong.
Okay, excellent. Good information, right? What I got out of that? Dark chocolate's good for us, right? Haha, yeah, let's have some dark chocolate. Okay, so remember the vast majority of the absorption is taking place in the small intestine, so all the nutrients have now been absorbed. And now we're going to take the rest of what's left and put it through the large intestine. It's larger because of its diameter, okay, so it's fatter, but it's much shorter than the small intestine. So very, very wide. Its main job is to take now, we're going to put the rest of that stuff into it, and the large intestine is going to absorb water out of it. Okay, so the part of our job of our body, of course, is to keep the amount of water we need and then get rid of extra water, right? We do that through the urinary system. And so the large intestine will absorb water all along there. And it gets rid of waste products. So while we're going through our process of living and metabolizing our food, we make some waste products that we don't use anymore, right? So one of the things we make, of course, is carbon dioxide, which we breathe that out. That's how we get rid of it, okay? But other things that we're making that are byproducts we're getting rid of, we will get rid of through the intestinal system. Okay, so we'll take stuff that we just don't need, we get the water out of it, and it'll start to make the mixture inside there thicker, and more solid. And right here at the beginning, so that comes in right here at the bottom of the colon, and right here is a little thing called the vermiform appendix. It's a little small attached area there that's filled with some fascinating tissue called lymphatic tissue. Like that lacteal in the small intestine, the lymphatic tissue is really part of the immune system. Okay, so sometimes that gets inflamed, and there have been people that have had to have that removed. So we can live without our appendix, but it does take some of our lymphatic tissue away. And so it's really best to hold on to it, to keep it if you can. So sometimes it does surgically have to be removed. So here we have a closer up view right here. So there's that appendix, right? Appendix. And then this is where it's coming in from the small intestine. Okay, so remember that's the ileum, and it's going to drop it right into the colon right here. And then it's going to move up through peristalsis and over through the transverse colon and down through the descending colon and then out here. So all along this way, what's it doing? It's absorbing water back into the body. It's concentrating the waste product through here. And then it's going to end up with the stuff we can't use that'll be stored right here in the rectum. And there's a very strong sphincter here called the anal sphincter. And that's a good thing right there, because what this will do, this will keep the poop in your body until you're ready to get rid of it. Okay, then that's when you relax the anal sphincter and you allow your the poop to leave your body, right? Okay. That's the gastrointestinal system. That is where the esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and rectum, that's part of the GI system, the gastrointestinal system. But there are these other organs that are helping to influence the digestive process, namely the liver. Now, the liver is very large. It is a large, probably the largest organ and gland in our body. It actually has 4 different lobes. You can see 2 lobes here. There's 2 smaller lobes back there. It sits on top of the stomach, kind of nestled on top right here. It's pulled back for this picture. And it's got this cool little bag associated with it right here. This is called the gallbladder right here, okay? And then we have this organ down here called the pancreas tucked behind the stomach. And now each one of these has a role to play in digestion. Now the liver has lots of jobs to do, but part of that is working with the digestive system. It has other things that it does as well, so it's doing double, triple, quadruple duty right there. Furthermore, the pancreas has another really big job, and that's in the hormonal field. It produces something known as insulin, and insulin is what helps us to get our sugar into our glucose into our cells to let us function. And so it's very important on the hormonal level, but it also makes gastric juices. So we saw the gastric juices in the stomach are made mostly of hydrochloric acid. Well, now what we're going to do is take that acidic chyme and put it into our small intestine, right, the duodenum right here, and we want to keep it from being too acidic, so some of the juices from the pancreas will actually neutralize the acid that's coming in there. Sort of like when you put baking soda and vinegar together, right? It makes that vinegar less acidic. So that's what the pancreas is going to do. And then we're going to see what the gallbladder does and the liver does as well. So here's what the pancreas looks like on the inside, okay? So it looks like this kind of bubbly organ here, right? And it's making these juices. Notice how we have this green thing right here, y'all. That is the bile duct. That's coming from the gallbladder. And then it ends up here with the pancreatic duct. So they have like it's called the common bile duct because they're sharing it right here. And the things that are being made in here are being made in these particular cells. Okay, so these are called the islets, pancreatic islets. The islets of Langerhans are the ones that are making the insulin and glucagon right there. So those are the pancreatic hormones, but that's part of the hormone system. Notice where they're going. They're going into the bloodstream. Okay, but what these other little cells are doing, the acinar cells are secreting digestive enzymes, and they're going down, of course, here into the small intestine. All right, it's kind of interesting if you look at the cells. Okay, we have alpha cells, beta cells, and our the ones making the acinar cells. Okay, so then we can put that into the intestine and start that process of neutralizing the acidic stuff coming from the stomach. Now we come to the liver, so we can see the right lobe and the left lobe, and there are these lobes underneath here. I don't know if it doesn't really show it very well. All right, but it's very large. Look at the big blood vessel coming into it. That's the inferior vena cava. That's a vein going straight up through it. And there, these hepatic veins are in there feeding lots and lots of blood to this organ because it needs that, because it's doing so many jobs. I think it has at least 6 functions that it's dealing with. But for the digestive process, mainly we're going to be looking at is it makes this substance called bile. Okay, bile. Bile is sort of a greenish type of a substance, and I want you to kind of think of bile as like soap. I know, that's kind of weird, isn't it? Have you ever been washing dishes and you've had a greasy meal, and that grease, the water just goes right off of it, doesn't clean it off at all, but if you put soap on there, it breaks up that grease. Well, that's what bile does. Bile will go in, so if we've eaten fat in our meal, so fat can be good for us, right? If we eat fat, we're going to send in that soapy substance to break this. It's called emulsifying it. It's going to break up that fat so that it can be into separate pieces. So guess what? So we can absorb this in our intestines, okay? And our intestines not only have the blood vessels to absorb nutrients, remember they have that lacteal, that part that's going to absorb fats. So that brings us then to the gallbladder. So the gallbladder, which is tucked under the liver, you can see it right there, and that previous picture. So its job here is just to hold on to the bile, okay? So it holds it and it concentrates it. So that means to take some of the water out of it to make it more, to make it a stronger soapy substance. And when we have some fat, our brain tells the gallbladder, oop, you better put some bile in there. And the bile goes down into our small intestine right here. Notice the pancreas come in there too. And it starts to mix with the chyme and starts to help break it down, okay? Also, the bile can come straight from the liver. So we can live without our gallbladder. In fact, you might know somebody who has had their gallbladder removed. Sometimes it'll have little spasms, like there's a little muscular on there, a smooth muscle, and it'll have spasms and it'll cause pain. And so some people have a lot of pain with it, little stomach upset, things like this. Furthermore, sometimes, how I told you it concentrates the bile in there? Sometimes it takes too much water out of it, and when that happens, their little stones can develop inside there. So little stones, yeah. And they really aren't a problem unless they get stuck right in there. All right, and block it, and that causes a lot of pain. So I know lots of people who have had their gallbladder removed, and they can still digest their fats because the bile is still being made in the liver, right? Okay. On page 162 in your book, and I looked this up, it's kind of going back a couple pages from where we were last week, but this is the right page number. So we're just going to review what is the digestive system right here. Okay, so I'm going to go through this, and I might be a little quick for you. You may have already filled these in, so you check and see if I'm right, okay? But remember, if you need more time to write these down, just pause the video at the end and you can do that. Okay, digestion begins where? It begins in the mouth. Yeah, chewing, saliva, teeth, all that business. Food moves down the blank by peristalsis. That would be the esophagus. Number 3, the blank produces gastric juices, which help turn food into chyme. Yay, that's our stomach. Chyme will pass into the blank where nutrients from food are absorbed. What absorbs nutrients? We know that. The small intestine, right? Water and salts are absorbed in the large intestine. I failed to mention about some of the salts. They go in naturally with the water, it turns out. 6, the blank produces insulin, which helps the body use sugar. That's interesting because that's true. That's the pancreas. But remember, it also produces gastric juices. That's the part of digestive system is what the pancreas does. But it does make insulin, but that's part of the endocrine system, the hormone system. Bile is produced where? It's produced in the liver, and it helps break down fats. And extra bile is stored in the gallbladder. Okay, so we know all that. Remember, we're going to eventually, I think, as far as I know, have a quiz on all this that last day. We'll see. Okay, we'll see how that goes. But this would be a good thing to remember to study for that. Okay, remember, you can pause it if you like. So this brings us to our lab that we're going to do today. Okay, what I have over here on this plate are some various items. I thought I had a page number on here. I don't, though. It is in your book. Remember from last week you kind of devised that tasting lab. Okay, so this is similar. I have these things here. We're not going to taste these, though. We're going to test these. So it turns out that when you put iodine on something that's got starch in it, the starch will cause the iodine to turn from a kind of a brownish gold color to black. Okay, so we're going to test it by dropping iodine. Here's a potato slice. This is a piece of pasta. It is gluten-free pasta. This is a Cheeto, which I'm using instead of bread because I don't have any bread. This is a Junior Mint. Yay. This is a hot tamale with a bite out of it. A cashew nut, an apple, a Lifesaver, a piece of carrot, and a piece of cheese. All right. So you're supposed to make some guesses on which one of these will turn black with the starch. And I'm going to go ahead and start our little lab right here. Here we go. Okay, students, here we go. I have this plate right here, and I have several items on it. Now, in your book, we're on page 171, and it calls for apple slice, bread, carrot, cheese, hard candy, pasta, potato slice, and then a couple more things. So I have most of those things, except instead of bread, I don't have any bread, so I have a Cheeto right there, okay? All right, so the idea here is we're going to put some we're going to put some iodine on these, and it turns out that iodine in the presence of starch turns kind of a dark purple black color. So if these things have starch in them, they should turn a dark purple black color. So you need to make a prediction and what you think will happen. Okay, so let's start with, think where everything came from. Remember, these plants are going through photosynthesis and they're storing, starches in their roots and even in their leaves and stuff like that. I'm surprised we didn't get asked to do a piece of leaf. Okay, so let's start with the Junior Mint. How about that? So it's kind of hard to see. All right. Can you tell that real well? It doesn't turn dark. Okay. Let's try the potato. That's an easy one. That's nothing but starch. So watch how it goes. It's kind of, the normal color of iodine is sort of a yellowish kind of color like that. Notice how it's turning very black right there. Okay, what do you think about the cashew nut? Let's try. Okay, I'm going to have to knock some of it off so we can see it. What do you think? Let's give it a little time, okay? What about pasta? This, by the way, is gluten-free pasta. Oh my, check it out. Definitely turning black, right? What about the Cheeto? Cheeto's made of corn. Oh, check it out. Very black, right? Can you tell that? Okay, I got a piece of cheese right there. I've got a carrot chunk right here. Let's try that. I've got a hot tamale, yum. And I've got a Lifesaver. All right. Is that everything? Yeah. So let's see. Let's evaluate here. We were supposed to make a guess. on it. And then, so I'll have a picture on there and have you make a guess. Oh, I forgot the apple. Hold on. What do you think about the apple? I didn't have much left in my... Let's see. Let's give it a few minutes there. Okay, so you were going to make a prediction, and now you're going to see if you were right. So let me see if I can get closer. Sometimes this turns off when I mess with this too much. All right, can you see a little better? So definitely a yes on the bread. We'll call that bread. It's actually a Cheeto. Definitely yes on the potato. Definitely yes on the pasta. What do you think about the apple? Let's check out the cashew. What do you think? I think so on the cashew. I got a little on my hands. It's okay. What about the candy? I don't think so. It stayed brown. But look at the hot tamale. That looks pretty dark, doesn't it? The junior mint, no. Cheese, I don't think so. What do you think? It still stays pretty brown, I think, not black. All right, so is that what you guessed? So now on your little chart right there, you'll put that on there, whether you were right or whether you were wrong. Okay, great. Okay, so this is the other one that's not in your book. This is, we're going to look at how acid breaks things down. Let's watch this. And it's going to represent your stomach. Okay, and then we're going to put some food in it. I've got these little crackers. They're like little oyster crackers, right? I'm going to put those in there. All right. Here we go. And I'm going to crunch them up a little bit like your teeth are chewing them up, right? So crunch, 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 crunch. So there they're kind of crunched up, or a little bit of physical breakdown right there. All right, see, kind of crunched up. All right, and now, what's in the stomach? Do you remember? We have acid in there. So I'm going to add some acid. Now, there have been times in the past where I have asked for a student to volunteer to spit in the bag. Ugh, gross, right? I'm not going to spit in the bag. Okay, sometimes I get volunteers. More often, though, I don't get volunteers for that. So I'm going to pick a little bit of acid. And so I decided to pick kind of a yummy acid right here. Look. Yeah, it's Sprite, right? Okay, so did you know that soft drinks are acidic? They have something in them called carbonic acid, and that's why they're bad for your teeth. They're sweet and acidic. They start to break your teeth down. Well, we're going to see what it does. Any predictions what's going to happen to our crackers in here? Okay, so I'm going to add some Sprite in there. Oh, it's fizzing. Okay, I'll add a little more. Fizz, fizz, fizz. And then I'll seal this up. And then what's happening inside our stomach? It's booming around, right? Boom, 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 boom. Oh, it's all the stomach moving around and everything. You know, some peristalsis, right? Some squishing like this. All right, so take a look at that. So do you see how it's dissolving pretty well in there? All right, so that's the job of our stomach, right? So what the job of our stomach is to start the chemical breakdown with acid, all right? It's also the job of the stomach to store it, to just hold on to it until the intestines become ready for it. And so there we go. There's our little acid test. You can try this at home, right? You can use a different beverage if you want. You can try some other things. You could compare it to just regular old water. You might be thinking, wow, wouldn't it break down, just dissolve with water? Well, there's water involved also in the stomach. But the idea here is that the acidic nature of the Coke should have broken it down more. If we wanted to do a more, a comparative type of a thing, you could certainly try something like that. Okay, gang. Okay, so this is an example of somebody who's done a body model of the digestive system. So you see what they have is it's a flat page, and then they've used clay to represent the parts. And so that says food tube, we say esophagus, stomach, large intestine, small intestine right there. So that's a good way of doing it, to make that model that way. So you would probably just trace that body. You could use something to trace that. I don't know how big this is, but it doesn't have to be very big. I know one time students did something similar to this on a big piece of foam board, so it's pretty large. And they were amazed at how much clay it took. And they were like, oh, I'm going to go broke buying all the clay to put on here. So you could make it smaller if you like. Here's somebody's kind of really elaborate version of the digestive system. So they're using something, a cup for the mouth and then some sort of tube. And these look like bags that have been, filled with something. So that'd be the liver and the stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. I don't know if that's material, because I thought about even balloons. You could use balloons to do it. All right, so that's just an idea. And that is the end of our lesson today. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed it. And then next week we'll talk more about, I think, nutrition and stuff like that. Okay, gang. See you next week.